Welcome to the Freight Directory podcast, covering all things related to freight, logistics, and supply chain, both in Australia and internationally.
Welcome. I am to the Freight Directory. I am Christine Contos, and this is episode 2 of the Freight Directory podcast. And today our guest is Susan Danks of Susan Danks Tariff Consulting. Susan is an absolute legend in the industry. She's a customs broker, she is a consultant, and she's an educator for customs brokers and also an advocate for industry. Welcome, Sue.
Hi, Christine. Thank you
Nice
for
to
having
have
me.
you. Well, it's great to have you here. It's good to have you here. So Sue, tell us a little bit about Sue growing up in the family.
Okay, so I have 5 sisters.
Wow.
And I'm the eldest. And in growing up, I didn't know what I wanted to be. I had no idea at all what I wanted to be. Initially, there was difficulty with me going on to the final 2 years of high school because I'm the eldest and the money was short. But I did. I got a scholarship. And then I wanted to go to university and that wasn't possible, even though I got a scholarship. I did go part-time later on.
What happened with university? Just not possible because of their finances. But
finances.
was it also something?
No, just finances. They needed them. Family needed the money.
Fair enough, yeah.
And look, that was fine. But I had no idea at all what I wanted to do. I'd been to a girls' school. I had no concept of what life was like. And so my dad said, well, why don't you join the public service, Susan? And I thought, oh dear, okay.
You really didn't want to do it, did you?
Yeah, well, Dad was talking Postmaster Generals and Social Security, and I thought, yeah, no.
Doesn't sound too exciting.
None of it sounded really exciting. And so I looked up government departments, and there were only 2 that interested me, and that was Customs and Immigration. And so I did the public service entrance exam, and I did very well in that. And as a consequence, I was given my choice of departments. And Immigration said, oh, no, you don't want females. Oh, my God,
Oh,
no.
wow. Yeah.
But Customs said, yeah, we'll have her. Now, in that time, it was unusual to have a female customs officer. We still had data processors, and females were data processors. They weren't officers. So for me to get that role was great.
You obviously excelled in that test.
I did okay. And then so I started with Customs, and that was an education coming straight from a girls' school. But I did it, and I learned not to blink no matter what I saw.
Yeah, well, customs, I mean, that's a pretty serious responsibility at the border,
It
isn't
was.
it? And
Yeah, it was.
funny enough, immigration and customs were
And now
obviously
one.
2 separate departments at the time, but now they're one, you
Yeah.
know, so...
Yeah, it was great. The at the time that I was in Customs, and I was there for about 10 years, there was extensive training provided to officers. So I did all the training. I topped every one of them, but still.
Fantastic, yeah.
So the last one was what's called the level 4, and it was actually the last lot of training. It was actually a competitive entrance exam similar to an employment interview. Anyway, I got into that, the only girl in the class, and that was 6 months full time, and then 12 months in what we used to then call the invoice room, which is really processing import declarations.
Identifying documents, that's
Yeah,
right.
the whole bit. So, but I was incredibly fortunate in Customs. I worked in cargo at the airport, and in fact I came close to running cargo at the airport, and had all the examining officers worked for me, and it was
Actually
fantastic.
physically getting out there and checking cargo.
Yeah, finding guns, finding drugs, being nice to people that you knew when they left the building you were going to have arrested. That's one of the benefits of being a young female customs officer. You know, we see all the police shows where we play good guy, bad guy. Everyone thought I was the good guy.
Of course, you're young, you
Yeah,
smile
female.
on your face.
Yeah, you're wrong. Anyway, it was great. So then I was at the airport, and that's when I then went from there to level 4, and then into the invoice room, and then I went to petroleum products. I was the first female petroleum products investigator.
Wow.
And my boss at the time was very keen.
Are we talking the mining industry here? Or are we talking
Anything, diesel fuel, so everything.
Huge.
So my boss at the time knew that a female was not going to go down well in investigations. So he made me sign everything, just S, S Danks, never ever Susan.
Of course, because they didn't know that.
No, they didn't know.
Could
They
have
had a
been
female
Stephen
in the
Danks
ranks.
for all they knew, yeah.
And then one day I was going out on a country trip with one of the guys. Oh my God, young unmarried female going away with a young unmarried male. Like we might have done the job, whatever. They came down, the gods from on high came down just to make sure that we knew what was going on. And they've walked in and there is S Danks. And that afternoon I was moved to the regular investigations, and that was great. And I was there until I left.
Unbelievable. So regular investigations, you had projects you obviously had to target, that you were given to target, and
Stuff.
Were you in uniform or
No,
sort of
no,
undercover?
not in Investos. No,
Okay.
no.
Yeah.
And it was great. And before anyone gets too excited, my experience in customs was fantastic. I loved it. I did not want to leave. My understanding is the department doesn't work that way now.
A lot of changes, and
A lot of changes, but it was great, and it was a great role, and I was incredibly fortunate with the roles that I had. And then,
it's all your grounding and learning, isn't
well, that's
it?
right, yeah,
Hands-on experience.
yeah, that's in a big way. There is so much that you can learn.
Were you ever in situations where you didn't feel safe?
Oh yeah. In one classic one, at the airport, a little Asian man did not like my attitude because I wouldn't give him his cargo. And remember, I ran the section, and I really thought he was going to hit me. There was just me in the freight shed, and I thought, this is going to get interesting. My dad, I might add a throw in here, had made sure I learned judo, martial arts early on. So this is going to get interesting, but I'm going to throw him on his ass. And then suddenly behind me, there's these two of my EOs, and one of them said, "Have you got a problem, boss?" I've turned around, and they're both about 12 feet tall, just looking down over my shoulder. And the little man scuttled away and everything. So yeah, I did, and there were other circumstances. I was seconded to a Royal Commission at one stage, and that was
Wow.
Ignore that. Just talk about the stuff we talk about. But it was good, and the whole cargo exam thing was great. I'd sometimes go out with cargo. Sometimes I remember one time we found a little gun, like a kid's wooden sliding pencil box.
Yeah.
It was in that.
So hidden.
Hidden.
in
Oh
that.
yeah. I mean, but I'm part Beagle. We found it and just put it back.
Oh, you didn't seize it?
No, we waited for him to come and collect it.
Oh,
Asked
yeah,
him was
of
it his, and then
course.
arrested him.
Of course.
Yeah. And other times we had drugs, and I remember one day coming in, and an incredibly friendly, nice gentleman with his little 3-year-old came in, and was so nice to me, and he sat the little kid on the desk, and we bonded, and it was lovely, and he was obviously full of it, and so I marked his paperwork to show that it needed to be examined, and yeah, there was drugs. So it was great. It was such
So
a
you
good life.
intuitively were pretty strong in knowing what to look for and where to
Oh yeah,
look.
but also at the time
learn-
you received a lot of training,
Yes, of
and that
course,
helped.
yeah.
And I had great mentors in the department.
Yeah.
Names that would still be familiar to some of the older people today. So I was really lucky that I was looked after.
Wow. Yeah. So you were destined to be in the logistics industry, really, and in
Oh,
a very
yeah.
specialised area, the customs, which is, being a customs broker today is much more global than what it ever was in the 80s, because we're signatories to so many conventions globally. And of course, it's a global economy.
Oh, totally. We do far more than we used to.
Yeah.
And in lots of ways, we need to know far more than we used to.
Absolutely. And a broker has to really be on,
Yeah.
really switched on. So you were destined to be in the logistics industry, weren't you? Because immigration customs, which ultimately
Oh, it's going one way or the other.
department,
It was that or tax or social security or something. And there's no choice.
No.
And it was a choice well made.
Yeah, and I think so too. It is a great industry, isn't it?
it is.
There's so many aspects to it.
Yeah.
I don't think you could ever really get bored.
No.
There's always something new.
There's always
something.
There's always
different.
something. Yeah, always something happening.
Yeah.
Always something, a challenge.
Yeah, well, it's quite a complex industry, right? If you think about all the end-to-end touch points, it's really complex.
Yeah, but it's these days. So we've always had the two issues. We've always had protection of the revenue and protection of the community. They've always been the two key things we need to look for. And in protection of the revenue, okay, that's why we're customs brokers. We check the docs. We make sure that the goods are correctly entered and that they pay no more duty than they're legally obliged to. That's how we teach, that's what people are supposed to do. Protection of the community is becoming more and more important, particularly as government has upped the duty payable on tobacco. As of 1 January, the prohibition on vapes, all of that sort of
anything
thing.
that's got an excise, really.
So there are, while we have in Australia and probably most countries, we have an enormous problem with drug importations, illicit drug importations. We have a huge problem with tobacco. The duty on tobacco is enormous. And so we need to be aware of that because there are a lot of what we call piggyback consignments. And as you know, Christine, piggyback consignments are where an illicit importer or supplier pretends to be someone else.
Yeah, importing something that doesn't incur all those.
I tell everyone I'm Woolworths and I want my consignment of fairy floss in that 22,000 kilo shipping container delivered to the back of the garage down the road. That should be a highlight for anyone that potentially there's an issue there and that needs to be referred to the ABF. And then the ABF, Australian Border Force, will decide if they wish to open it and examine it or whether they're going to let it go and see where it goes. It depends upon the circumstances and quite often we as brokers are not told how it all ends up, although we
definitely
can and do end up in court occasionally.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not that often.
Absolutely. And if we suspect something's right, we've got an obligation to report.
Absolutely,
on a suspicion too.
Yeah.
And all that behaviour is really just about circumventing paying the duties and the taxes. Which means then that tobacco finishes up in the commercial market at a much cheaper price than your honest retailer down the road. Who and then of course the flow-on effect is in the community and putting honest business people out of business. There's just so many flow-ons.
Oh, there is. Like whenever there's money to be made, and there is definitely money to be made in illicit tobacco imports, there will be crime.
Yeah.
And there is and it's probable that the illicit bikie gangs, as an example, are involved in it. Organised crime.
It's always,
there was so much money involved. And we do know that happens. It's not our role it's just our role to identify it and then say to the Federal Police, ABF, well, look at this one.
Yeah.
Because we as brokers see all the documents.
Yeah.
So we as brokers should be looking for that kind of thing all the time.
Yeah.
And what we need to do to train our industry is to look for that. Because for years and years and years, until piggybacks and tobacco and drugs got such a huge problem, drugs has always been a problem, as you know, but until it got such a huge problem, we used to make sure that we looked after the revenue. And we looked after the community, but now we need to be so conscious that we're focusing on both areas. And then there's all the other things too. We have sanctions. There's the whole Russia-Ukraine thing going on. We have restrictions on. There's been lots of talk in the newspapers about AUKUS. You know, the Australia, UK, US. Trying to think third country.
Yeah.
Deal where we're going to get the nuclear submarines. But
And then there's restrictions on certain goods, you know.
well, that's right.
Are deemed potentially export control goods.
Yeah, and that catches things too.
That's just this could be components or goods that are used in retail, day-to-day manufacturing, or wholesaling. But that one component could ultimately be used to produce weapons of mass destruction.
That's
and
right.
so, yeah, I mean, it's such an intricate job, really, when you think of it from that perspective, about all the things you have to try and collect from a piece of document or documents,
Yeah.
shipping documents.
What you have to know. So we look at imports, and we exports used to float, but
Yeah.
now we have so much concern about defence goods that we do need to be careful. There are penalties for trying to export goods that are controlled as defence export goods.
Absolutely, yeah.
And the example, Chris, as you know, that I always give is some O-rings. I mean, rubber O-rings, everyone's got rubber O-rings. But one particular type made of one particular rubber is suitable for nuclear reactions, the high temperature reactions. And so it's controlled. You're not allowed to export it
Yeah.
without a permit,
That's
from
right.
Department of Defence.
Well, you're breaking the law.
That's right.
And
There
it
are-
has criminal implications. It's not just,
Well, you don't know where it's going to go. We try to teach with exports to know your client. Like, just because you sell to, Malaysia, you do want some reassurance that the goods you're selling to Malaysia aren't then going to be diverted to Iran. Where
Yeah.
we're prohibited from selling lots of goods to.
yeah, so know who you're trading with.
Know your customer.
Know your
Yeah.
customer, yeah. I know, it's such an interesting... We'll go back to that. So you worked... So you're 10 years with Customs. What does it take to be a customs broker? Because,
Yeah.
a lot of people fall into the industry not really understanding what a magnificent career it is. And not only as a customs broker, but there are many other career opportunities in the industry.
Oh, the industry there are.
And it employs, I think the statistics are 1 in 5 people globally.
Yep.
Yet we all know about being a lawyer or a doctor or an accountant, but no one really seems to understand the career opportunities in the logistics industry.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's very true. So a customs broker, because that's what you initially asked me about.
Yeah.
The key criteria is strong attention to detail. And in training someone, it's not school, boys and girls. You need to know it all. And if you don't know it, you need to know where to go to find it out.
Yeah.
Because if you get something wrong, you can lose your own licence, which is your income. You can put your company out of business. You can put the importer or exporter out of business. You can impact the economy. You can impact our environment. We can do bad things if we get it wrong.
Absolutely. We've been letting in things like goods with asbestos on them, which is,
Well, there's
not great for your health.
Years ago, there was a problem in the Northern Territory with their rivers and streams being full of this noxious imported weed, and Quarantine tracked it down because customs brokers do customs and quarantine and just about every other regulator under the sun. In fact, I think we're responsible for global warming, but that's another story.
Well,
Yeah.
Well, the truth there's
Yeah.
I think 30 government divisions that have some sort of
Involvement with
requirement at the border that is managed, of course, through
Yeah,
the
well, that's
Customs
right.
Department, who's
Yeah.
also the collector of duties and
Yeah.
taxes. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what happened with this weed was that someone smuggled it in. So it wasn't even and that's just as critical to get through to people that they shouldn't smuggle. There are implications
Yeah,
for
great.
it.
Yeah.
And in this particular case, this lovely little bush grew on his balcony for years and years and years and looked lovely, and then he died. And the relatives came and just kicked it off the balcony into the grass,
So it finished up in all the waterways, did it?
finished in all the waterways,
Oh,
and they still can't get rid of it, and it's been decades. And that sort of thing happens all the time. We saw The horse diseases going around. We see so much. You know, we have our regulations and legislation are there for a purpose, and they need to be obeyed, and that's whether we agree or not. Goodness knows how many times I've said to people, I didn't make the law.
No,
I just need to follow it.
yeah, and as you said, it's
Yeah.
protecting the community or the revenue.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and to me, and I think because I was trained in customs in the days when protection of the community was the most important thing, that is still the most important thing to me.
Yeah, I
Even
think
though as a
agree.
consultant I work enormously in saving customs duty, in GST, and all of that where there's a monetary saving for the client, you're always looking at it in terms of, but is this bad for our country? And you have to, because that's part of it.
Absolutely, we're an island, so we're quite unique, and we're quite lucky in that we're protected from a lot of things, and our agriculture is highly valued around the world.
Oh, that's right.
because we don't have many
We don't have the nasties.
pests and
Yeah, that's
nasties
right.
that impact,
Yeah.
being able to produce that
Yeah.
agriculture.
And that's why we all go mad from April to September every year with BMSB season.
BMSB,
Brown
brown
marmorated stink bug.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, the bane of our life. In terms of what I did anyway, after customs.
Yeah.
Uh,
So 10 years, what happened then? You decided you just didn't, you wanted to move on and do something different?
I was
or-
driving home one day and my husband said to me, shouldn't we have children? I nearly drove off the road.
Of course.
Yeah, it was his idea, not mine. No, I love my kids dearly. If they ever listen to this, I love you, darling.
She does. I
Yeah.
know Sue really well. She loves her
Yeah,
family.
I just need to get that in. So anyway, ultimately we did, and that was fine. I sort of hung around in customs, and then I had a child at the same time as both my neighbours, and one neighbour's little boy died of cot death, and when he was a few weeks old, all our babies were a few weeks old, and I thought, what am I doing? What is the important thing in life? And
Yeah, it does.
and
make
so
you
I
weak.
left. And by then my husband was really keen on me leaving because he didn't like me in investigations.
He had concerns around that. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But I loved it.
Yeah, of course.
But that's why he had concerns. Anyway, so I left, and then I was home for a while, and we were bringing in, we were importing. Water saver shower heads at the time when they were new to Australia. And I do all the customs work and all the rest of it. But ultimately it wasn't really what I wanted. And Paul died suddenly when he was quite young, in his 30s. And so there was no choice. I was still sort of mid-30s, and I went back to work in a screaming hurry. At the time with customs, you could only do complete days. I couldn't do complete days. By then I had 3 small children.
You needed flexibility.
Little children.
Yeah, you needed flexibility.
Yeah. So I Connor Anderson, on my lad, anyway, Connor Anderson. Connor Anderson offered me a role with whatever hours I wanted, doing whatever I wanted, just come and work for us. So I did.
Yeah.
And that was the start of it. So I worked there couple of months, and Paul died, and I had to have an income. There was no income. So I sat the national exam 6 weeks after.
So as a broker, you have to get your qualification, which is a diploma qualification these days. It was a Cert 4 at the time.
Yeah. It was an advanced diploma for.
Oh, it was an advanced diploma, correct.
Yeah.
Sorry, beg your pardon.
Yeah.
And yes, it was a couple of years of study.
3 years.
Yeah.
3 years of study.
Okay.
Yeah.
And 2 national exams is my
It was.
recollection.
One in the morning, one in the afternoon.
Yes, and you had to pass both of them.
At 70% or more.
70% or more. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
I did that too, yeah.
I came out of that exam and I knew I'd done it, and there were all sorts of personal reasons that I knew I had to pass that for my kids.
Yeah.
And I did this almighty Toyota leap in the air. Now, at the time, we didn't have all the IT things we had. So I had this removal.
Did you have a trolley full of books?
Trolley full of
and
books.
Things you had to tariff.
Carrying the tariff.
Yeah.
The customs tariff is like about 30. It's about 1 metre wide. It's enormous.
Well, it used to take up your return panel on your desk.
Yeah, that's right.
It was on the left.
So I'm carrying that. I did this huge Toyota leap in the air with, yes, I've done it, and I landed wrong and I broke my ankle. And, yeah, I know, it's kind of made the year really. Then the adjudicators, or whatever they're called, the supervisors for the exam came out, and I was reasonably well known then because I'd been a customs officer, and now, and they've all walked out and they've laughed and said, I'm sitting on a step by then, oh, it's just Sue, and kept going.
Oh, dear.
So my family lives on the Central Coast. Late that night, literally late that night, my sister and her husband turned up and collected me.
Oh, dear.
Yeah. So that was...
Yeah.
Anyway, so I just
Didn't
sort of
matter.
went on. Didn't matter.
You got
I
your
passed.
Yeah. It didn't matter.
And
so.
I've just sort of gone on from there.
Yeah. So Sue, you've got your customs brokers qualifications, and you're working in industry. Paint a little picture around that, because my recollection, it was not very many women doing this.
There were very few women. There were actually, until now there's a lot of female brokers, but when we started out, and when I started out, there were not many women, and it was a very male-dominated profession.
How many women would have finished up their qualifications as a broker when you went through the course?
Oh, not many.
Were you one of the only
a few.
one? Yeah.
No, a few probably. You don't know how many pass.
Yeah.
The national exam, when we still had it, only had a 20% pass rate. Because you have to have that 70%.
That's right.
And you need to have it. It's not just, it's too hard. It's just, as I said earlier, you're going to put someone out of business or ruin the economy or environment of the country if you get it badly wrong enough.
Absolutely.
So I worked there and then patently I'm short of money because Paula died and there was no money and I had a mortgage, and I was asked to start to teach later that year, and so I did.
So started teaching the broker's course?
Yeah. Yep.
Excellent.
And so I did.
With the TAFE? Was this with the TAFE at the time? Yeah.
TAFE at the time.
Because it was only the TAFEs that offered it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I was teaching at St George TAFE, which still offers it, and I was also teaching at Petersham. Not only is the course no longer offered there, the TAFE is no longer there, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's gone. But anyway, I was teaching at the two of them, all sorts of subject. I think there's about 15 odd units in the qualification. I forget. At the time, you had to do some basic commercial law and accounting.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah. They've now been dropped, but that knowledge is probably still of benefit to anyone.
Yeah.
It is, particularly the law side, because our industry is becoming with a more and more a focus on the legislation. And if we get into a dispute with customs, we need to be able to
reference it, don't you?
Reference it, yeah. And as you know, we need to be able to say, I'm right, you're wrong. Section 154(1) price-related costs, work goods. Yeah. You need to be able to justify it, and to have a reasonable conversation about it. So it is very important, and that's why we need to do continuing professional development training every year.
Yep.
So we do 30 hours of CPD, and we do, it depends on quarantine, and X number of hours of quarantine, and they're mandatory if you want to have your licence.
It's the only way to keep it.
It's the only way to keep it. If you don't do it, then we are now called licensed customs broker, so they can't take away that customs broker title, but you're no longer licensed if you don't keep up your CPD and CBC.
And it is true, we are licensed. We're licensed by the federal government.
That's right. That's right. There's about 1,800 licensed brokers in Australia, I think, but probably only 2/3 of them are actually operational.
Now, that's a really interesting topic. So, it was predominantly a male industry because it wasn't a thing women went to. It wasn't a career women actively chose. Females are more interested in this career. We're getting a lot more women through, and I believe we're getting some really good, high quality candidates as well.
We do. We have some excellent male and female candidates coming through, and we have some fantastic brokers that we've trained in the past. And that's what I love. I mean, I just love when I've taught someone, and started teaching in 1991, so I think I've taught half the industry.
That's amazing. That's fantastic.
I know. I just
you are a legend in the industry. You absolutely are, and a real inspiration. Honestly,
thank you.
Sue. But the average age of a broker, now that was what
the average broker is late 50s, early 60s.
So heading towards retirement, but I think a lot of them stay in the industry for a long time.
There was a gentleman, unfortunately, I think he died last year, but I lose track of time, as we all do. But he was still working, and he was 93, 94 in Melbourne,
amazing.
Clearing timber consignments.
Yeah.
Just amazing. It was my hero. Like so many other things.
And I think he was doing some long distance running as well, wasn't he?
He was. He used to go in marathons.
That's how I want to age. I want to be switched on mentally and be able to physically still
not just get up and down the stairs.
Yeah, exactly.
Except that we both know I gave up running when I broke both wrists.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's another story.
That's another story. We're not going to that one.
Well, we are getting. Why do you think we are getting more women interested in that career? And also, are we getting enough people through at the moment to be as customs brokers, given the average age?
Yeah. So, answering the second question first, no, we're not. We desperately need people to want to be customs brokers. We desperately need people to want to be in our industry. I think years ago, so I live in Sutherland Shire, and brokers tend to be working around the airport or the ports in Sydney. Yeah. Obviously, if you live in Melbourne, you're not, but in Sydney and probably in a lot of other places, we work around
once upon a time you probably did.
Yeah, that's right. So the kids would go to school and they'd hear about, because part of the package for a broker at that time was always a car, and it was always a powerful car.
Yeah.
And so you'd get these 18-year-old kids, and you'd give them the keys to your car and say, run down and clear this bill for me. And I had one where I'd set the speed alert on it at 80, I think.
Yep. Okay.
And he came back and said, you've got a really good car. And I thought, what have you done? And went down, and he'd said it 160.
Okay.
I know. But but because the fast cars aren't there anymore, and there's no need for it anymore, that detracts from it. And also, at that same time, we used to call them house clerks, and so they were always running around the streets, clearing bills, doing all sorts of things, going to the movies in the afternoon, sleeping under trees. We didn't have the
technology, of course, so, you went up to Customs House to do the clearance.
Yeah.
You went to Parcel Post to do the clearance, and of course you met a lot of people your age, boys and girls. It was a lot of fun, actually. It was a social.
It was good.
Social thing.
It was very much a social thing.
You didn't hurry back.
Yeah, no. If you came back, there were
you probably went to the pub for lunch.
Far too many house clerks courting cars asleep under trees.
This was a big queue. Yeah.
Big queue. Yeah. But it was so in those days we had no issues at all. We had staff coming out of our ears. But now that we've all progressed with technology so much, and we do and with the volume of freight coming in, we need to. Yeah, you can't stay in one place. So these days, a lot of it's done remotely, and we're not doing the cargo exams we used to do. Where we'd go down the wharf and unpack containers and open packages and do all that sort of thing. And you did that. Whomever you were, male or female. Yeah. I used to always travel around with my Stanley knife. It was just one of the things you did as a customs broker. Yeah. Now, of course, if I carried a Stanley knife, I'd get arrested.
Yeah, you might be.
But in those days, it was okay. Yeah. So we did good things, and it was seen as fun things by the youth, coming out of school.
And it's a real it attracts them, yeah.
Yeah, and it attracts them. Now, particularly those who don't want to work in an office, little realising that as they got promoted, they were going to end up in an office, but still.
Yeah.
But then now, with the increasing technology, we don't have the need to do a lot of the manual work we used to do. We do it online.
That's
You know, we used to go into the shipping company office and what we used to say was to clear the bill, but that was to pay the charges and, you know,
hand over
delivery
the original
order
bill of lading.
hand over the original bill. Now you do it all online. So that's need...
Right. You've got a delivery order in exchange.
Yeah, that's right. That need is gone. And so a lot of the kids that want to work outside are not seeing those opportunities now. But there's still so many opportunities, and it is interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, there are, I think, so I'm well known, yes, but I think I got where I am because when I was working in a brokerage, they just gave me all the hard stuff.
Yeah.
You know, and you'd sort of look at it and turn the paper upside down and think, Heather, what am I going to do with this, you know? Yeah. But all of that is knowledge that builds. And
you had to problem solve.
Well, problem solve, yeah. And you know, I've been told in a meeting with a client when I asked him what type of pump it was it a piston pump, was it centrifugal, was it blah, blah, and he's kind of blinked at me, this little lady in a suit, and said, ladies don't talk that way. It's, as brokers, we get this really well-rounded knowledge of all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is really interesting. But so we need to get the kids interested in it again. One of the bad things about the industry, because you need to do positive and negative, is that, as I made the comment earlier, it would seem that we are now responsible, personally, for everything that goes wrong in the world, just to round it up.
Personal liability, personally liable,
and that's because of the customs penalties that they impose for any error, including things like using an incorrect statistical code. You know, like it's all right where you've underpaid duty millions of dollars. You know, fair enough, but
it's a lot tougher. Yes,
it's a lot tougher than it was.
Strict liability penalties.
Strict liability penalties. Yeah,
it's a great revenue raiser, isn't it?
We used to have a penalty scheme.
Yes.
And we brought in about $4.30 annually, I think. And then the government found that Canada had a penalty scheme, and we cross-relate a lot with Canada. The Canadian penalty scheme brought in about $20 million annually, and the government looking for money went, that sounds good.
We could do the
same. Suddenly we
have
have an infringement at a scheme. Yeah.
So what advice would you give to somebody wanting to come into the industry?
I think it's a great industry. I think it's well worth anyone doing. We are currently it's a diploma level. We are talking about making that the first step in to be able to do a master's degree. So there is, I think, if you've got the diploma in customs broking is hard. It has got a really high focus on law.
Yes.
And my thoughts has always been, and like I was director training for 13 years. So the new current course is my baby. The previous course I also designed, it was my baby. So, you know, just a open disclosure, I've got a vested interest in it. But I always wanted, at one stage, the broker's course was a Cert 3. That was a nonsense. And I used to refuse to allow it to be watered down. It wasn't to meet in with ASQA, you know, the National Training Regulator standards. It was to meet the requirements of importers, exporters of our industry.
Yeah.
So now it's a diploma, but it really should be a degree.
Oh, it's very
for the
complex,
level that's required.
There's some very complex areas, valuation, classification.
All the rest of it, all the legal things.
All the legislation,
Now, if they get the diploma, and we get this, and the Masters is still under negotiation. It's not a given thing, but it's being looked at a really high level within industry.
That's fantastic.
There's no need then to go and do a degree. You'd do your diploma, and then the process would be you'd do a grad cert just to carry yourself over, and then do the Masters.
Yeah.
And there is no Masters that targets outside of the customs industry. There is a Masters currently offered in Australia, but it targets more customs officers, and it gets a lot of overseas customs officers doing it. But it's
more about administration, customs administration.
Admin conventions. It's not really how to. It's not really the law. give them a set of documents and say classify this and do the valuation and what would you do with royalties, and they'd probably blink at you. My apologies to anyone I offended.
And commissions, what would you do?
What would you do with commissions? Is this a buying commission or a selling commission? All of that is different from the focus of the other masters. So I see real benefits for our industry, not just in Australia, but worldwide in doing it. And that's one of the things that we should mention before we finish, that internationally all customs administrations rely on the World Customs Organization. Yes. And so the tariff, which is how we classify goods to determine the duty payable, to 6 digits should be the same all over the world. Yeah. So if you can work as a broker in one country, you should be able to do it at least as an entry rider in other countries.
Absolutely.
If you can, the valuation provisions are substantially the same in most countries because they all rely on the principles of valuation.
Correct.
From WCO. Small discrepancies, we rely on FOB. A lot of countries in Europe might rely on CIF, cost insurance freight. Yeah. But well worth doing.
Nevertheless, you should know your Incoterms and you should know how to apply them regardless of where you're working. So you not only have, been a broker, but you've also represented industry in many forms, okay? You've been on advisory bodies and committees. Tell us a little bit about all the things you're doing there.
Okay. So with customs, I'm on the Compliance Advisory Group, CAG.
Representing industry. And we talk about issues, basically, problems. And you get to give them
industry perspective, feedback.
Yeah.
It's not, COVID has slowed that down a lot because when we have a face-to-face meeting, we bite. Well, no, we bite. We're in a loving way.
Yeah, right.
We share our thoughts and feelings.
Okay, so it's a lot more colourful.
No, it's very polite, very professional. But also, those people on the committee are not concerned about saying, well, I disagree. And right. That's the other thing as a broker.
Well, that's what you're there
Learn
for.
to disagree. Not just on everything. But you need to ask the difficult questions. You need to disagree, and you need not to be frightened to say that. So we'll say when we don't agree with something, and ABF will often take it on board, or ABF will say, no, well, because X, we can't do anything about it.
But you're having the constructive conversations, which are really important.
That's right.
Versus on where you can't mention that.
No. Yeah. And I'm on DFAT, the Department of Foreign Affairs Rule of Origin Committee, and that's fantastic. We have pushed for years, and I'm the only customs broker. We've pushed for years to get a broker on that because we were getting free trade agreements made that weren't always possible to enforce in terms of operation, and the big one, you'd be aware of it, Chris, was that we had with CHAFTA, with the China Free Trade Agreement, just as one example, goods had to have direct shipment, which is fine. Direct shipment is defined, but what happens a lot in Australia is that from any country, we have a lot of overseas distribution centres. But the way that too many of our free trade agreements work is that those distribution centres need to be under customs control, or you lose the preference you obtain from the free trade agreement. And then you had issues like CHAFTA, if freight going into Darwin, everything going into Darwin is transshipped, and it's all transshipped through Singapore, and Singapore's a free port, so there's no customs control. So nothing going into Darwin could have complied, and regulations were put in place to counter that. But so
that
benefit...
would mitigate the benefits of the free
that's
trade
right.
agreement.
Yeah. So the benefit we've got with me being on there and one of the lawyers being on there, there are other people on the Rule of Origin Committee. They tend to be certificate of origin issuing bodies. So the benefit they've got with me, and I don't want to mention his name,
Yeah, no, you can mention it.
with
Yeah,
Andrew Hudson
yeah.
being on there, is that we'll say, have you thought about X?
Yeah.
The way that this works in real life is, ABC and DFAT Listen, which is just wonderful.
Fantastic.
So we
they're
had
consulting industry before they,
Yeah.
sign off on these things, which is great. Yeah.
So we've been talking, as an example, about the EU Free Trade Agreement, which everyone asked me about. EU Free Trade Agreement. One of the reasons that delayed it initially was that one of the conditions the EU wanted to put in place was that you couldn't claim preference on goods manufactured in Australia from imported components. So forget the rules of origin. But Australia manufactures from imported components, so that
Correct.
would have
So
wiped any benefit.
Any benefit.
But they
absolutely.
listened.
Yeah.
And now the EU has dropped that demand. The delay at the moment, as I understand it, is the minister and the government pushing for more agricultural access, which is fine. But where I'm concerned, I'm worried about the geographical indicators, because things like feta and prosecco,
We
and
won't be allowed
I don't
to
know about
use-
camembert, but that sort of common name that we use in all our language, we'd no longer be able to use. And so Australian
on
manufacturers,
commodities made here. Yeah.
Australia. If you go to the supermarket and you think I need to buy feta, and you've got the European one called feta, and the Australian one is not able to be called feta, you've got to call it Jimmy's own cheese or whatever. The consumer's not going to know.
No.
And they're just going to buy the European one. And so our own companies miss out.
Yeah, that's a huge
that
commercial
it's
difference.
So,
Disadvantage, really.
And there's something like just under 400, I think. So a lot of them are irrelevant. You don't care. But there are too many generic ones that we need to negotiate on. And New Zealand just agreed to them. New Zealand already has a free trade agreement with the EU. So if anyone's interested, check out the New Zealand government website, because I'm pretty sure that's going to be our free trade agreement.
Wow. And so were willing to forego
Well, they're not as big.
those competitive advantages and
And
for
that-
the New Zealand goods. Yeah, they're nowhere near as big.
No.
Yeah.
No, so I don't know. Look, it's a government-to-government decision, not my call.
Yes.
But I'm very pleased that at the moment, anyway, we are standing firm. And that again
Yeah.
is my opinion.
Yeah, that's been put
Nothing
on the
else.
back burner. And so, okay, so another one is NTAC. You're on that committee?
No, NTAC is the customs tariff section.
Oh,
so
okay.
because of my role in consulting, I deal extensively with NTAC, the National Tariff Advisory Centre, I think is their
Okay.
full name.
Yep.
But as customs brokers, we talk in acronyms all the
course.
time, and
Names are too long.
and the TCO section, because we still have an awful lot. So our duty rate tends to be 5% or 5%, or it's free. But in a lot of other countries, the duty rate varies enormously. There's just been a case I was talking to you about the other day in the US where the penalty that issued was $368 million for short paid duty, and it was involved cars, and the importer was bringing them in as passenger motor vehicles, and then he was moving them down the road and taking out the window panels and just putting a side panel in and taking out the seat from the back. Whammo, you have a goods van.
Commercial vehicle.
Yeah, commercial vehicle, and the duty rate went from 2% to 25%. So it's really critical. It doesn't impact us at the moment, but it's really critical that we get the classifications right to make sure that similar things don't happen to our own clients. And where there's enough money in it, so with what I'm concerned with tariff concession orders, not so much little machines, but whooping huge manufacturing projects. If I can save $50,000 for every $1 million spend, that's an awful bid. Given a power station is in the billions, that's an awful big potential duty saving if they can comply.
Yeah, and I think it minimises some of the tax as well.
Well, it
doesn't
does,
it's-
because your tax, the GST is calculated on
Cost of
the
goods.
customs value, which is, their FOB basically, plus the duty, plus overseas freight and insurance, 10% of that. The only thing is, though, that it only really reduces the cost for the consumer when it's consumer goods. Otherwise, the importer just claims it as an import tax credit and gets the money back anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So, and you're also representing FTA. You're the head of customs and compliance.
Yeah,
and you run their CPD sessions.
Yeah.
Some of their you're a presenter on the CPD sessions.
Yeah.
And at the moment, been doing some rounds.
That's right.
Around the nation.
Our CPD year starts on the 1st of April, and I'm head of customs and regulatory compliance for Freight and Trade Alliance, which is a professional body in our industry representing customs brokers and freight forwarders and importers and exporters and, basically logistics, people involved in the logistics industry. Yeah. But as I said earlier, and so I look after, regulatory issues or customs issues. And so to a certain extent, with members I will provide advice to. And at the moment I'm in the middle of scooting all over the country providing CPD training as part of our brokers' required mandatory training.
Part of the annual training. I mean, that's a pretty impressive CV there, Sue, with everything you've done, if you'd call that.
Thank you.
But also, as you mentioned earlier, you're an educator. You have written the Customs Brokers course.
Yep.
Previously, you were on the board with what was known as CBFC and FCA for many years, doing the same thing, writing the
13
course.
years.
Yeah. And now you're with WiseTech Global, writing the course for the brokers.
Yep.
And are you actively involved with the students as well?
Oh, yeah. So I facilitate the advanced classification and valuation units because I am determined, come to my classes, boys and girls, I am determined that they're going to learn to do it right. And so I'm important. It's very important. It's so important. It's not school. This is your career. Your income is going to depend upon how good you are.
Yeah. So, and really complex areas.
And it's a complex area, yeah.
Yeah. So that is just amazing. And you've got the best stories. I mean, they're just really, really great stories. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
They're the public ones.
I've got some quick fire questions, all right? So what are you reading at the moment? Other than customs legislation.
I was just going to say the Customs Act.
Oh, I love it.
What was the thing I read before that?
True Die Hard.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. I think earlier today I was reading a legal case. The company won't want me to mention their name.
Okay, yeah.
What else? Newspapers.
Yeah. Okay.
Occasionally. Ads. Love a good ad.
Do you really?
Sales.
Oh, I love a good sale. Yeah. There's been a few good ones.
Yeah.
All right. What's your favourite pastime? What do you do to relax and?
Oh, I was going to say read. I know you
love the galleries.
I love art galleries.
Yeah,
I do. I love art galleries. And I love. I spend, if I do get some free time on the weekend. Galleries, museums. All of that. I am a bit of a geek.
Yeah, I
live with it. It's just me.
Yeah, I know. I have a very good story for that.
No.
I'll ask you questions and you will laugh, but you can relate. What advice would you give your young self? Knowing you're going to be in this industry, but you can only do this because it's retrospective, right? But what advice would you have given your young self?
Oh, my goodness me.
Sorry, I put you on the spot.
No, you didn't. No. I didn't want to leave customs.
You loved it then.
And I still am sad I had to. Not sad, though, the way the department is now.
Yeah.
But,
it actually was a huge career move.
Huge.
You had the knowledge.
But it was I had the knowledge in reverse, two sides of a mirror. And there's all these things you have to think about that you can't, even now, that I can't say. I think there is drugs in that consignment. Why, Sue? I just think there is,
Yeah.
So what advice would I give myself? I don't know. I'm to marry Paul earlier.
Oh, that's lovely.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So I haven't really thought about that too much.
Yeah.
Isn't that silly?
No, well,
but I
it's
haven't.
an odd question, I guess, isn't
Yeah,
it?
no.
All
I
right.
should have thought about it. It's one of those ones that I might have been asked but didn't think about it. Sorry.
Yeah. What's your favourite holiday destination?
My holiday.
Favourite holiday destination?
Oh, overseas.
Anywhere overseas?
Prefer Europe
Yeah.
to Asia. Love the UK. Love Italy. Love Germany. Love Austria. I'm
Overseas,
very
yeah.
adaptable.
And your favourite drink?
Oh, alcohol.
Just give me. Yeah. I was always going to ask what your favourite love language is, but it's not this show.
No, it's not. No. Let's not do this.
I did hear somebody said to me, in a conversation once, cheese and champagne was my favourite
I
love
don't need the
language.
cheese.
I like that one. Yeah. We're going to wrap up now. Thank you so much, Sue, for joining us today. It's just been fantastic talking to you. I mean, we could spend
And we
another
do.
2 hours talking, couldn't we?
Yeah.
Really, yeah. So where can we find Susan Danks Consultancy?
I'm on the internet, www.tariffconsulting.com.au. I'm on LinkedIn. Just look up Susan Danks. The profile goes on forever. But in that profile, there is also my email address. And I think the office phone is there. You'd also get on to me through Freight and Trade Alliance.
You can also find Sue on Freight Directory, and we are definitely on all the socials, on LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. Fantastic. So as we wrap up another insightful episode for Freight Directory podcast, we want to remind you, stay connected with us via all those social media connections to keep up with the latest freight and logistics podcast news and industry information. Don't miss out on any of our episodes. You can stay tuned into your preferred platform. And once again, thank you very much, Sue, for joining us.
Thank you, Chris. It's always a pleasure. And thank you, Freight Directory.
Thank you for listening.